I share all this to share that what happened in Flint is another example of what happens when we don't listen to science. And it's not the first time we've denied science and scientists, and we've all seen it in the pandemic as well, and you're seeing it now as well, but the basic common sense of water treatment of lead was ignored and denied.
Aloha mai kako. Thank you all for joining us here this evening because we're discussing a challenge that is truly of existential importance to all of us. How to ensure that our freshwater supply remains safe for this and future generations. Clean water is the basis of life. Ola ikava. Bye. It is essential to our health, our families, our economy, our communities. And the University of Hawaii has a vital role to play in order to reliably provide clean water to a large population, both rural and urban in our state. We need engineers, chemists, microbiologists, epidemiologists, public health workers, and all of this depends on sound public policy. We need political scientists, communication specialists, and policy experts. We at UH provide the research, education, training, and support to help all of these systems function properly. So our guest this evening is a truly inspiring example of a university faculty member who has gone above and beyond her job as a pediatrician to become a public health researcher, policy analyst, author, and an unstoppable force for change. Longer intro to come. But I now have the pleasure and honor of introducing our introducer, who of course needs no introduction, but here I am anyway. Dr. Josh Green has survived and even thrived through his first 100 days, so he is no longer our new governor. He's brought his personal commitment to kindness and caring to his entire administration. For those of us in academia, as my father would say, and he was a PhD also, Josh is a real doctor. He's an ER doc who came to Hawaii by way of New York, Pennsylvania, and parts beyond. Swarthmore and Penn State, pretty good schools, not as good as UH, but we can forgive him that. He represented Hawaii Island in both the State House and Senate before serving as our Lieutenant Governor. During COVID, he was, and I have to credit Robert for this one, literally everything, everywhere, all the time at once, scribbling on his whiteboard, sharing data, answering questions, and urging action. He has been recognized as both Physician of the Year and Legislator of the Year. So please join me in welcoming a good friend, a strong supporter of UH, a champion of great ideas, who has actually been a regular at these events for years, Dr. Josh Green, Governor, MD.
Thank you, President. He speaks so eloquently for a gentleman who is constantly tortured at the legislature. We're honored to see so many people tonight. And before I get to introduce a legitimate hero, Dr. Mona, I just wanted to say mahalos to her for bringing so many extraordinary people together. I see community activists that are fighting the right fight to make sure that water is pure. I see directors of health, past and present, people from the national space in the EPA, to hear her, justices, leaders across our campus, children. It takes someone special to bring that kind of group together, and it was not Lassner that did that. It was Mona, and it certainly was not me. Now, it is exceptional to see an activist community come together, and I'm grateful again to see the opportunity arise because of what Robert does. Repeatedly here with the total support of the university, So thank you for that, guys. It is special. You know, in Hawaii, we are addressing crises, as we know. We have the water crisis, without a doubt, as a result of the fuel spill and the contamination of our aquifer at Red Hill, and it has to be addressed. So having a leader of this nature, someone who has been given accolades, not because she wanted them, but because her actions earned them, is the perfect speaker for us here in 2023. We know that she wants to fight to protect public health because we see it comes right out of her being when you talk to her. She did something very brave, Dr. Mona did. She spoke up. And I've met a lot of people now over the last few years, exceptional people, who after speaking up found themselves victimized, found themselves marginalized, found themselves losing their careers, losing their capacity to be educators, to be professionals in their district. So that is extraordinary, what she did. Now, her work in Flint, Michigan is something that is world-renowned because not only did she save thousands of lives, but she saved generations of individuals that would have suffered the ill effects of the toxins that came from the water. Ariston Menhudor, water is life in Greek. That is really what she ends up being, because as a pediatrician, and I see my pediatrician and our dearest pediatrician here, she's able to convey that both in her profession and in her work, her policy work. It's special. Now she's doing something much harder than all this. She's raising 2 teenage daughters, which we know is something to behold, having one myself. One will be an activist. One will be a surfer, I'm told. Balance in the universe. But that is what it takes. It takes women leaders to create some of what we need in our society. It shouldn't be lost on us. And this is another, if I may, small credit to President Lassner. Just across the way with the East-West Center, there was another Women's Leadership Summit today, happening right now. In this case, East-West, Japanese leaders and U.S. leaders. Again, 300 women leaders coming together to grow their footprint, to help lead us as a global community against some of these great challenges. So that makes it such an extraordinary thing for me to be able to recognize Dr. Mona, who was recognized first by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, one of the women of the century, not bad, but also a woman professional, a pediatrician, author of What the Eyes Don't See, something extraordinary, which I feel so thankful that you gave me a copy, which I will then give to my teenager. Really someone who fights for truth over lies, science over ideology, which is more important than ever, as we've seen in these recent years during the COVID crisis. Action over a passive place in society. It is difficult. It is difficult, but that is what democracy should be. Someone who steps up, seeing a woman leader rise like this, is something to behold. So, if I may call you up, Dr. Mona, please come. We are so excited to be with you and to get to learn from you. Thank you for sharing.
Before we branch into the larger issues, let's kind of recap the story for folks. First, how did you, as a pediatrician practicing in Flint, how did you first start to worry about the water quality?
That's a great question, and I'll try to answer this question in maybe just like an hour and a half, is kind of what happened. So any Michiganders in the audience? Oh my gosh, no way! So hold up your hands and point to, okay, everybody look at them. Point to where you're from with your hand, okay? All right. So Michigan is the Mitten State. What are we surrounded by? Water. We're surrounded by the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are the largest source of fresh water in the world. 21% of the fresh water in the world is around Michigan. And here's Flint. So I saw people pointing to like Detroit, maybe like Ann Arbor. So Saginaw is a little north of Flint, so not far at all. But this is what we do. We point to where we're from. So there's Flint in the middle of the largest source of fresh water in the world. And that's where I had been working as a pediatrician. I was a professor. I was a residency director. So I was in charge of training kind of the next generation of doctors. I'd also had my public health degree. And I was like, I'm going to train these doctors to like embrace medicine and public health. Like not just to treat ear infections, but to make sure they're addressing upstream injustices and inequities that also make people sick. So working as a pediatrician, and families would come in, and they were like, complaining about like the water, like, I bathe my baby and they get a rash to the water line, or they're like, is this okay? And I'd be like, oh yeah, it's okay. Maybe just like dry it or wet it. That's what we like, tincture of time, lots of reassurance. Or they'd be like, are you sure I should be mixing my baby's formula with this water? So how do you guys make formula? Powder is mixed with water. And they're like, are you sure we should be mixing, making formulas this way? And for about a year and a half, I, as a pediatrician with my white coat on, full of doctor confidence, was telling my patients that everything was okay because all the folks in charge were saying everything was okay. Because how can it not be okay? Because we're surrounded by
fresh water.
Water. And there's like rules and laws and regulations, and there's people that wake up every day, right? That we support as taxpayers that make sure that when we turn on our water is okay. So for a while, I was telling my patients everything was okay. And that all changed for me when, by pure serendipity, a high school girlfriend came over for dinner. And my high school girlfriend, of all things, was a drinking water expert. Like, who knew? Like, make friends with all kinds of people.
She had been your high school valedictorian.
A high school valedictorian. She was a high school valedictorian. I was the class president. Like, one of the smartest people I knew. In high school, we did a lot of environmentalism. We shut down a local incinerator in high school. And like, as high school activists, we elected a state rep who the very first thing he did when he got to our legislature said that you couldn't operate an incinerator, which burns trash, like within a certain radius of a school, and it was in the backyard of an elementary school. So like at this really early age, I'm like, oh my God, policymakers are amazing. Like they can they're public servants, and they can serve and they can right historic wrongs. So we were both kind of informed by this environmentalism. I went on to environmental health medicine, and she went on to become a drinking water environmental engineer. Went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, great school, and then ended up at DC and worked for the EPA. And she had just come back home to Michigan, and we're hanging out as, girlfriends having a glass of wine, all good stories with, start with wine. Just kidding, salad is good. And she's like, Mona, like you're in Flint. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, the water, there's problems with water. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, well, I saw a memo from a former colleague of mine at the EPA who I know and I trust, and he shared that the water is missing corrosion control. And she stares at me like this.
Like you would know what that meant.
Yeah, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't learn about corrosion control in medical school. That wasn't part of our curriculum. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And she's like, without corrosion control, the water is going to be super corrosive, and the lead that's in the plumbing is going to come out of the plumbing and into the drinking water.
And because it used to be protected by deposits, or just the water, the corrosion control water doesn't leach the lead?
Yeah, so this I think of it like a medicine corrosion control that you're supposed to put in water treatment, and it creates like a coating in the pipes so that the metal that's in the pipes won't come out. And there's a lot of lead in plumbing. So do we have any like young people? Like what's that, who just took like high school chemistry, or maybe folks remember? Like what's the elemental symbol for lead? PB. So PB comes from the Latin plumbum, which means plumbing. So the word lead means plumbing. So we've been using lead in plumbing since the Roman times, for a long time. So we have a lot of our drinking water delivery system, our infrastructure is made of lead. And so this important medicine, corrosion control, it doesn't eliminate, but it minimizes lead from coming out of pipes. And so Flint's water was missing this ingredient because the water was switched from the Great Lakes.
Right, how did that happen?
Oh
right,
my
like
goodness,
they had
yes.
The water was previously drawn from Lake Huron, and they switched it to the Flint River, which is closer?
Yes, so that's a great question. So In 2011, Flint lost democracy. You're like, what? What is she talking about? Lost democracy. So Flint, do you guys, Michigan, Saginaw people, what was Flint famous for a long time ago before the water crisis? Not before Michael Moore.
Yeah, I knew Flint from skinning rabbits.
Cars. So cars were born in Flint. General Motors was born in Flint. And we were the birthplace of cars. And even more importantly than the birthplace of cars, does anybody else knows what Flint is famous for? It happened shortly after cars were being made. You get extra credit if you know this. Assembly lines, more than that, workers, unions, who got
Yes.
that? Good job, unions. The UAW was born in Flint. Workers sat down in Flint and organized a strike that was heard around the world, demanding things like occupational health and safety and worker protections. Because on the days that they made blue cars, they were coughing up blue, and the days they made red cars, they were coughing up red, and they were demanding living wages and all these things that a lot of folks are still fighting for, right? But anyways, their union was recognized. So more importantly,
This is like 1930s New Deal.
1930s.
Yeah, okay.
And the middle class was actually born in America. The middle class was born in America, and that deal that was made kind of spread throughout the country. So Flint had this period of prosperity for a long time. Highest per capita income in the country, 1980s.
One income earner could support a family.
Absolutely, one job, one union job, one earner could support a middle class family. Great education, great infrastructure, everything that you needed for that great American dream, right? But then somebody mentioned Michael Moore. Then what happened? Plants closed, jobs were lost, globalization, automation, and
Plants closed because they moved them to non-union to the south.
They
and
moved them to other
partially?
countries. They robots came in. So many reasons. So the population dwindled, and and jobs were lost, and that brought forth every disparity you can think of: high rates of poverty, unemployment, disparities. People who had the power and the privilege to leave our city left. White flight, efforts to regionalize failed. So white folks left. They built highways that cut through black neighborhoods. They came in, they extracted the wealth, and they left, and they didn't contribute to the city. And that left a tax base that couldn't support this infrastructure. So Flint was near bankrupt. And in 2011, Flint was so bankrupt that the state took over. And we became under emergency management, which is crazy. And this emergency manager law, was put into place by our legislature, which was at that time the most gerrymandered legislature in the country. And it was voted down against the will of the people. Was a ballot measure that the people of Michigan said, we don't want emergency managers. But our legislature pushed it through. It was signed by our governor. And at one point in Michigan, half of our African-American population was under emergency management, compared to just 2% of our white population. So scratch your head.
Which means they're managed by the state, not by their local
Yeah, and is that how
elected
American
officials.
Studies professor, is that how America is supposed to be run? Is that a democracy?
Well, it is often how America is run.
That's right. So totally undemocratic, unaccountable, unelected officials running majority-minority committees. And they were governing by austerity, by saving money. All they wanted to do was cut costs, cut costs, cut costs. They almost sold off our hospital. Detroit was under emergency management, but they had the A team of emergency managers, and Flint kind of had the B team. And they're the ones that decided that no longer will Flint get their water from high-quality Great Lakes, but we're going to save a buck, and we're going to change your water to the local Flint River, and we're not going to treat it properly. So in 2014 is when our water was switched by unelected, unaccountable emergency managers, and for this predominantly poor, predominantly minority population.
Okay, so people can understand just how serious lead is. You mentioned that lead has been a metal that's been used from the dawn of civilization.
Yeah.
How early did people start to realize that lead could be toxic?
Yeah, centuries ago, we've known that lead was a poison. In the early 1900s, the rest of the world was pretty much stopping the use of lead because it was already known to be a poison. I mean, there's theories that hypothesize the demise of the Roman civilization was because of the use of lead, not only in plumbing, but they also put it in like food as a salt, like not a good idea. Lead is sweet, like Van Gogh used to like, and painters would lick, lead paint, with some, maybe that's why they went a little, nuts. So people have known why lead is bad for a long time. But in the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, when the rest of the world was like, we're not going to use lead anymore, that's when American industries realized, hey, we can make a lot of money by putting lead in lots of different things.
Including another Flint story, or at least a Michigan story. I actually did not realize this until reading your book, that I grew up in the age of unleaded gas, but I didn't really realize what a global scourge that we'll be grappling with for who knows how many generations to come, leaded gas was. How did that originate?
In the 1920s, General Motors and Standard Oil decided to put lead in gasoline to fix a problem called engine knocking, which was the loud noise that happened when fuel and air met. And their renowned engineer, Charles Kettering, and their scientists said, we can't find any alternative besides adding lead to gasoline, tetraethyl lead. And scientists at the time, one of my heroes, Alice Hamilton, a badass woman scientist a century ago who was a lead expert, said, you cannot put lead in gasoline. You are going to create a global public health disaster. And they're like, oh, it's safe. It's a gift from God, they said. It is a gift from God.
Even though the workers in this factory were like jumping off balconies.
Workers, were jumping off factories, being straitjacketed. People were dying. And at that time, they made a deal with the Surgeon General. And they said, General Motors said, if you can prove lead is bad, we'll stop using it. And that set forth this paradigm in public health called the Kehoe paradigm, named after this GM apologist scientist, Kehoe, that assumes things are safe until proven dangerous. And that has persisted to this day in public health. We allow industries to spit out chemical after chemical, and we assume they're safe. And then amazing academics and scientists and activists realize, hey, this is not safe. And the damage is done, and it takes forever to regulate those chemicals. And that started with the General Motors and the use of lead in gasoline.
Just since we're at a university and lots of us are either science nerds or wannabe science nerds, how in particular does lead damage? Like, what's the chemistry and the biology of how lead does damage?
Yeah, so
to kids especially.
Yeah, so lead was in gas. We put lead in paint. We put lead in plumbing. Lead is still in bullets and fishing tackle and cosmetics. So lead is still ubiquitous, even though we stopped its use in these lots of big things.
I was telling her when I was a kid, we used to melt fishing weights for projects.
Yeah.
Which I was, how much smarter would I be?
I know. You turned out okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share my one Obama story that I shared. So President Obama came to Flint during the water crisis. This was kind of on his watch, and we were talking about lead, and he was joking with the guy next to him. And he's like, well, we all used to eat paint chips when we were little. And then I turned to him, I'm like, but imagine what you could have been.
With me, it works.
It works for everybody but him, okay? And plus, then I'm like, well, you grew up in Hawaii. You didn't have as much lead exposure in Hawaii. Anyways, it's a different story.
Okay, but in the body, what does it do?
Lead is bad. It's in a lot of stuff. We stopped using it as much, but we never removed it from things. So we continue to live with its lingering legacy, especially in old homes and older communities, especially in the Northeast and Midwest. So we used to think lead was a gift from God, right? We used to think it was amazing. But we now know, and we increasingly have known for a long time, how toxic it is. It is a neurotoxin. It affects the nervous system. It also kind of mimics calcium in your body. It ends up getting deposited in your bones. When young children are exposed, it impacts cognition, it erodes your IQ, it impacts behavior, it leads to things like oppositional disorder, it's been linked to criminality. Young kids exposed to lead as adults and seniors can have high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease and gout and early dementia. So like the science is it's crazy. In this amazing book called Lead Wars, which is really good lead history drama, the author calls it a multi-headed hydra, because whenever you turn, if there's another research article or another study that shows how evil lead is. And because of this amazing science, we now know in the public health and the medical community that there's no safe level of lead, none. Even when I was practicing as a resident, as a young doctor, we used to think that there was a safe level. Like, oh, you could have this much amount in your body. But now we know that there is none. There is no safe level, and that what we're supposed to do is practice primary prevention, which in the world of public health means you're supposed to find it in the environment and make sure people aren't exposed to it, especially young children, because it impacts the developing the brain. So lead is bad.
And known as bad for decades,
centuries,
much more so than other chemicals.
Yeah,
right.
And still hard to regulate, and still people to this day who litigate that it's okay.
Okay, so how did it? I mean, I realized that when they switched the water to the Flint River, it wasn't like there was lead in the source. They were testing presumably for that.
Right.
But because the chemistry of the water changes, there is lead originating at the source that people are consuming it. But even before you got involved, people, like there was the EPA memo, there were parents complaining, going to city council meetings with bottles of brown water. Like, how was none of that?
Yeah.
How was the corrosion control not? I mean, is that known? Like,
yeah. So I'm sure you.
Who dropped the ball on such a basic?
Right, and I'm
question?
sure there's a lot of parallels in your story, but there was a lot of missed opportunities. There was a lot that was known, that was ignored. Within a few months of our water switching, you guys remember General Motors was born in Flint, still has some plants in Flint. The General Motors plant in Flint makes engines, car engines, and they were using this water. And they realized that the water that they were using was corroding car engine parts. So General Motors was allowed to go back to Great Lakes Water, and the people of Flint were literally told to relax, that everything is okay, that everything is testing in compliance, yet it was corroding car engine parts. So many, many missed opportunities. Amazing citizen science happened where the citizens were testing the water, working with water scientists, and were transparently showing lead levels in the water in the hundreds and the thousands of parts per billion, and they were being attacked and dismissed. I worked with a group of fourth graders in Flint. They were amazing. They were scratching their heads, like, I wonder what could be going on with the water. So they had this amazing question. They collected Flint water and Detroit water, and they put nails in these test tubes. And these fourth graders noticed that the nails in the Flint water were falling apart, and it looked like a snow globe in there. Like just pieces of the nail were coming apart. And the fourth graders released their science, and the state said it was too expensive and too complicated, and they could not have done that science. So I share all this to share that what happened in Flint is another example of what happens when we don't listen to science. And it's not the first time we've denied science and scientists, and we've all seen it in the pandemic as well, and you're seeing it now as well, but the basic common sense of water treatment of lead was ignored and denied.
And so you come in from this barbecue with your high school friend. Activists are already complaining about the water, but what did you were able to sort of bring some data that was more definitive?
Yeah.
How did that happen at the beginning?
Right, so I'm hanging out with my girlfriend. She's like, there's gonna be lead in the water. And that is the date and the time and the place where my life changed. From that moment on, I stopped sleeping, I stopped eating, I lived on coffee, I lost like 40 pounds, not a good way to lose weight. And because we just talked about what lead does, right? We all now know how bad lead is, and how especially bad lead is for kids, and how especially bad lead is for kids who are already struggling with almost every obstacle in the world. Like the kids I care for in Flint, we have like a 60% child poverty rate, like every disparity you can think of. Like the last thing that my kids needed was lead in their water. This is a population that's already been oppressed for so long. So when I heard that, like I freaked out, just like any of you would have freaked out. And by pure serendipity, the next day I had a meeting with the health department and the person in charge of lead for the health department.
Done. It's gonna be done, yeah.
Like, oh my God, like this is awesome. Like this problem is gonna be fixed. because I am an eternal optimist. And I'm like, hey, I'm so glad I'm meeting with you today. And I was pre-scheduled. And I'm like, I just heard about the potential of lead being in the water. You're the public health department. What are you going to do about it? And he's like, well, I'm the public health department. We don't handle water. That's not our jurisdiction. So I scratched my head. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a public health issue. Like, how can water not be something that you care about? And he's like, that's the public works department. I'm like, what the heck is public works? They're like, well, they handle water. So I wasn't getting anywhere. It took weeks to get any information, months to find out what was going on. It was, blocked, closed doors everywhere. So I knew, just kind of throughout my career as an academic, as a scientist, I knew that if I was going to do something, I would need data and science in my pocket. And I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have needed to do this. But I did the research to see if our kids were being exposed. Once again, I didn't need to do this. You don't have to
You mean because they should have done it already?
No, because we knew lead was in the water. You don't need proof that kids are being poisoned or exposed to do something about it. Hard stop, it's in the water. Car engines are corroding, that's it. The moms, amazing moms and activists and pastors, there's so many people were saying something was wrong and nobody was listening. Moms were going to town hall meetings with jugs of brown water and being arrested. It should have ended then. But I knew that if I could do something, I would need that science to speak truth to power. And quickly did the research to see what was happening in our children's lead levels, and then I did something that was really bad. I've gotten, so many of these humbling accolades were mentioned, and they're surreal. But I think that my most favorite award I've received was a disobedience award.
Oh, that is good.
From MIT for being academically disobedient, because when I did the research that showed that there was more lead in kids' blood, so there's a lot of academics here. What are we supposed to do when we do research? How do we share our research?
Journals?
Yes, and what's that process called?
Peer review.
How long does that take to publish something in the peer review process?
I'm embarrassed because I owe 2 journals peer review responses.
So other academics out there? Years, months, years. It takes a really long time to get your research published or presented at conferences. And so I was academically disobedient, and I stood up at a microphone in our hospital at a press conference. And I shared the research that our kids were in harm's way, because there was no option. Every day that went by was another day that kids were drinking water that could potentially diminish their potential.
Because in these preliminary findings, you were able to show that there was some kind of screening.
Yes.
Beforehand, so you had blood lead levels before, and then you were able to show after.
Yeah, so blood lead levels are part of a surveillance system. So this is like Public Health 101. So it's all blood levels are sent to the county and state health departments, so we knew what they were like before and after. We pulled them actually from our electronic medical record, from our health system, because we couldn't get them from the health department. And we showed that they increased only in the geography of where the water was. There was no change outside of that. And we overlaid it with where the water lead levels were the highest, and we showed that the greatest increase in blood lead levels happened where the water lead levels were the worst. So share this transparently, publicly at a press conference in my hospital, which is not what doctors and academics do.
And then everything got fixed.
Then I saw the press conference happened. I'm like, yeah, this is my job as a pediatrician, as an academic. I'm just, I'm supposed to protect kids and speak up for kids. And plus, I'm just sharing science. Can you imagine being in the middle of a public health crisis and not listening to science? So I felt great for a half an hour, and then every arm of the state and the federal government went after me and said I was wrong. They called me all kinds of names. My favorite was that I was causing near hysteria, which is sexist and has been thrown against so many women. That I was splicing, dicing numbers. I was an unfortunate researcher. And I felt this big. I literally felt tiny. I felt defeated. I began to second guess myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe somebody else, imposter syndrome. Why should I do? This is not my job. Maybe somebody else should have been doing this. And then I'm like, who am I? Like, I am barely 5 foot tall, brown immigrant, first generation woman going against some of the most powerful forces in our state. I had just gotten a Fitbit. Like, obviously I could tell my heart rate as a doctor, but I could see my heart rate, and it was close to 200. My hands were shaking. I felt it was hard to speak truth to power. And I'm like, maybe I should have just kept my eyes closed and gone about my busy business, right? As a busy mom, wife, professional. And then fortunately, fairly quickly, I realized that this wasn't about me. This had nothing to do with me, but this had everything to do with my kids. My patients are my children. They are my kids. And my research was numbers and science and statistics, but every single number was literally a patient, a kid I'd probably even seen and cared for in the past year or so. And it was almost as if they kind of jumped out of my spreadsheets and lifted me up and gave me the courage to keep going and to fight back and to push back. And we fought back with more science, and a growing kind of team of allies were at my side, and we didn't give up. We persisted, and eventually the state conceded. And since then we have kind of been on this path to recovery.
And what do you think finally turned it? Like, what finally broke? Was it the organizing? Was it the bigger data set?
With science,
all of the
right?
above?
It was science. So no, it was partly our science, but it was partly the media. After I shared this research very publicly, Flint became this international story. So, people often ask me, what can I do to change the world, or what can I do to make, bring something to light? And my answer is often support local journalism. Subscribe to your local paper. We need eyes on the ground. So after that press conference, there was days where I did 15 interviews a day, to make up for that media inattention, to shine a light on this issue, and ultimately to shine a light on the fact that this is not an issue just in one place, that this is an issue in so many places that need bright spotlights paid to them.
Counterfactual, what if this had been happening in a wealthier, to what extent is it a story of environmental racism? It took how long were the kids being poisoned before they switched back? 2 years?
Over a year and a half.
I mean, the parents with brown water.
Yeah.
Do you think they would have gained attention sooner?
Absolutely. This never would have happened in a richer or wider community. I'm going to read you a section about that. So Flint falls right into the American narrative of cheapening Black life. White America may not have seen the common thread between Flint history and these tragedies, but Black America saw it immediately, that the blood of African American children was unnecessarily and callously laced with lead speaks in the same rhythm as Black Lives Matter, a movement also born from the blood of innocent African Americans. So there's another quote I include in here by kind of one of the fathers of the environmental justice movement, Robert Bullard, who said, some communities have the wrong complexion for protection. So it's been cited in many investigations as an environmental injustice, as a case of environmental racism, and as it has been. And there's a bright light to that. After Flint, the lexicon, the words environmental injustice became part of our language, and people started to pay attention to it. I know there's folks here that work in environmental justice. The EPA just created an Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights, which is amazing. Presidential candidates talk now about environmental justice, because people are now aware of it, partly because of Flint. Flint was not the first case of environmental injustice. This has been happening for decades. Communities of color, poor communities bear a disproportionate burden of all environmental contamination, and Flint is another example.
And as you mentioned, Flint is a community that's facing a large set of challenges. I was looking up, because I'm a criminal justice historian, I was looking up homicide rates. Flint has a population of about 80,000 now, or something, quite reduced from
300,000
its peak. In 2020, there were almost 70 homicides in Flint. In Honolulu, that has a population 10 times as large, there were about 20.
Yeah,
So
I've cared for kids with lead poisoning because of gunshot injuries, where the bullets have been retained in their bodies and they continuously excrete lead. So imagine the trauma of being shot and then just the lead poisoning from having retained lead bullets. So yeah, we have a lot of violence, we have a lot of poverty, food insecurity, housing insecurity, racism, every kind of systemic inequity you can think of. It's a country that when the water crisis happened and it was exposed, folks on the ground thought it was purposeful. They're like, oh, look, it's a genocide. They want to get rid of us.
and yet you love working there. So what is it about the community, despite its challenges, that gives you hope and inspiration?
Yeah, I first fell in love with Flint as a medical student. My medical school, Michigan State University, is also a land-grant university, community-based medical school. I did my clinical training there, fell in love with the city, fell in love with pediatrics, fell in love with the history, the loyalty, the grit, the activism, the camaraderie. I run something called the Flint Registry, which is supported by CDC to follow folks that have been exposed over time. And it's all done in humble community partnership. We have community members that are part of this work. We listen, we have advisories, and I have a group of parents that advise us, and we were meeting with the parents, and we're like, well, what should the logo of this Flint Registry be? And one of the parents suggested the Sankofa bird, which is this mythical African bird that's flying forward, so forward thinking, and looking back, so never forgetting kind of the history and the injustices of the past. And the bird is holding an egg in its mouth, so eating our young. Just kidding. Prioritizing our kids. So that I think that's so symbolic.
It's its own egg.
It's its own egg. So it's so symbolic of the city. The city is all about pushing forward, and it's all about we do a really good job in this country forgetting history or not learning our history or bearing our history, especially dark history and injustices. But it's about keeping our eyes open to our history. We walk over history every single day, and we can't move forward without looking back, and that's part of that looking back. And then once again, as a pediatrician whose kind of work and life is grounded in our kids, it's about prioritizing our young. Which we also don't do a great job of in this country. So that's what I love about working in Flint. That's kind of our mission. Despite all the bad things that happened, we've really kind of been leaders. We helped pass the Infrastructure Act, which is the largest federal investment in water infrastructure, replacing lead pipes throughout the country. A lot of what we do, we translate into policy and practices to help other communities.
Yeah, well, I mean, as bleak as the story is, and as long-lasting as the damage and irrecoverable as the damage will be for some of those afflicted, it's impressive to me how much you were able to, you and other activists were able to keep pushing to not just get the water switched back to Lake Huron, which you were able to do. You were able to get a surprising number of heads to roll.
Yeah.
But you got some funding for those broader kind of set of social challenges that kids will be facing too. So what are some of the victories that came out of this despairing moment?
Awesome, thank you. And that's what I want to share. Once again, not just the story of this crime that was committed against some of our most vulnerable people in this country, but also this amazing story of resistance. And almost this playbook of resistance and how to build hope in communities. So yes, finally we got our water switched, but our pipes were corroded. We needed that to be replaced. They're still being replaced to this day. It's almost done. But more than that, it wasn't just about water. It was about kids and community and how to make them whole again, and not just whole, but how to recover and thrive. I talk about this Flint Registry that we run that connects people to services. We've made over 30,000 connections for folks into really important, public health promoting services, from nutrition, and we have new early education centers that we were able to build for high quality year-round childcare for kids. Early literacy programs. We're now an Imagination library site. Do you guys know what Imagination Imagination Libraries, founded by Dolly Parton, one of my heroes. So we mail books to kids. Every kid from the age of 0 to 5 gets a book delivered. We've mailed 300,000 books to kids as part of that. We have a Reach Out and Read, which is a clinic-based literacy program. In my clinic, so my pediatric clinic is located on the second floor of a farmer's market. And we moved there on purpose to address nutrition insecurity. It's very hard for kids to get good food. I used to sit with patients and I'd be like, you need to eat avocados and kale. And they would stare at me like, where am I gonna get that and how am I gonna afford that? So we as an institution moved our practice on the second floor of a farmer's market, and every patient that comes in printed on our electronic medical record, just like amoxicillin gets a script for fruits and vegetables that has a $15 value. And as academics, we've assessed it and we've shown how it's improved nutrition intake and behavior and nutrition security. And our US Senator, Debbie Stabenow, was the co-sponsor of the US Farm Bill. She'd been to my clinic, she knew about the nutrition prescriptions. So she included in the US Farm Bill a national nutrition prescription program inspired by our little program, our little clinic, at $25 million a year, and that was a few years ago, and now it's at $40 million a year. So now there's a national nutrition prescription program that anybody can apply to provide, healthy fruits and vegetables for kids. Not enough, but good things. So lots of awesome things that we've been able to put into place.
And this is a mix of federal funding, philanthropic funding, state funding.
Yep.
MSU, your university,
Yep.
also I'm curious about this initiative that you've set up, because your job has shifted right from trainer of residents to this pediatric public health initiative?
Yeah, so I run this awesome initiative called the Pediatric Public Health Initiative, just to do good for kids and to share our best practices. We've brought in just our little initiative, probably over $60 million, all kind of soft money and federal money to do different programs, to do advocacy work, to share what we've learned, and that's, for me, this is what it means to be part of a university. Once again, we're the pioneer land-grant university in the country. We have had a footprint in Flint for over a century, from extension and agriculture and farming and 4-H, all these different things, just like you do. The purpose of a university, at least to me, is not to publish papers and write grants. It's to serve, right? It's to work hand in hand with our communities, to be kind of that voice of kind of science and facts and expertise, to work once again in partnership with the community. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of the story, the kind of the role that academia played, to be kind of a check and balance to government, and to be a partner kind of in recovery, and to be also a very trusted voice in community. So I see that also kind of as happening here, and as a increased opportunity for what can be done.
I was struck too about, not just the ways that the university or activists can hold government accountable, but that to what extent you maintained a quite hopeful and optimistic view of government, even though there's a way to understand this Flint story as an episode of government neglect, institutionalized racism, indifference, sclerotic bureaucratic resistance, and on down the gamut of government failures. But I was struck how much your views of government in the book come out as a kind of optimistic view of high school of civics.
Oh, Robert, I love that question. So you're spot on. So I think a lot of people hear Flint, they're like, failure of government at every level, defund every agency. This is another example of how government fails. And I come away with the opposite. So you remember, the Flint story was also this democracy story, right? It's also what happens when we don't have representative and whole democracies. So part of kind of the recovery is making sure that we have participatory democracy, that people who are in office look and come from the communities that they serve. When our elected officials were aware of this crisis, the ones that still had power, like our state U.S. senators and our U.S. reps and our state legislators, when they were aware of the crisis, they never stopped fighting for Flint. And for me, that was an affirmation of what government can be and should be. That once again, government has this ability to right historic wrongs, to put public welfare kind of first and foremost, especially children. We know, and we've seen it with some of the policies that have happened since. In Michigan, we have a new governor. The very first executive order she did, very first thing when she got in office was a whistleblower protection order, learning from Flint, encouraging more folks in state agencies to speak up when there's something that might be threatening the kind of health and safety of residents. We also had a complete restructuring of some of our departments, and we have an environmental justice advocate at the state level. We have a clean water advocate. So lots of things, have happened that have once again kind of reaffirmed my faith in that government can work for us if we can hold them accountable, if they can be representative.
And can you, are the projects robust enough that you can see the effects in your clinic patients or in your own? I understand you're also piloting this kind of anti-poverty program modeled partially on the subsidies for
Child tax
parents.
credit. Yeah. So my work is I love my work. I'm so excited. During yesterday, I was on the North. I took my youngest daughter. We rented a car. We drove up the North Shore, and we were around some cliff, and there's the amazing surf that we're watching, and I got a text that I had to submit a grant. So she opened my laptop, and while we're on this cliff and there was construction, it was one lane, and I logged in while driving, not safe.
This is good. This is not public health.
This is not public health. And I submitted this $15 million grant that we just got to do infant allowances to address child poverty. So inspired, so I never stopped working, but it's so exciting. But inspired by the amazing child tax credit that was expanded during COVID. So during COVID, we actually figured out how to take care of people a little better, right? And I don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't working for a lot of people. So something that we did do as a nation was we expanded the child tax credit and we lifted 4 million kids out of poverty.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize quite how big of an impact that, for all the failures of government that we saw in COVID.
Yes. So actually, people had more food security, and parents actually had less stress, and they had these monthly payments that they knew that they were getting, so they
Low-income people got a sabbatical for the only time in human history.
It's amazing. I mean, poverty is a policy issue here. We have the worst poverty rate of anyways. So that wasn't renewed. Congress did not renew it. So we plunged 4 million kids back into poverty. And we now increasingly know what poverty does to kids and how it's a toxic stress, and just like lead, it can mess up their brains and really alter their life course. So we're working on this citywide effort to give all pregnant moms and all babies money, unconditional cash. And this is happening all over the country, but nothing at this scale. We're doing it for the whole city, and we can kind of do it for the whole city because we're a small city, because everybody's left our city. But maybe people will move back, come to Flint, it's amazing.
Houses are cheaper than Honolulu, I'm pretty sure.
The cost of living is amazing compared to here. No housing issues. So seriously, we're always hiring. So we're working on lots of really great things that we hope will also inspire national policy, so that when there's a window of policy making, we can put back into place the expanded child tax credit and other supports so that families can raise their kids.
Yeah, so on the national stage, we've got an acute pollution emergency in East Palestine from the train derailment. There's this horrific slow motion kind of metaphorical train wreck in Jackson, Mississippi of the collapsing municipal water supply. You might have heard we have some issues here. They decided to store 250 million gallons of jet fuel 100 feet above the water table. What could go wrong? But what lessons do you think from both the tragedy, the crisis, but also the resistance to it and the recovery do you think might be applicable to some of these other locations, including ours? And I think we'll talk more about that
Yeah,
in a moment?
there's so many similarities in all of these crises, and I've really had the privilege of working with so many other communities. One of the last times I testified before Congress about the need to invest in infrastructure and water deliveries specifically, I said Flint's water crisis wasn't the first, it wasn't the worst, and it wasn't the last. There continues to be very similar issues that have happened, similar environmental injustices where people are told that everything is okay and it's not okay, and they don't even know what they're being exposed to. So I think there's a lot of kind of lessons that we can share, and I think while being here, I've met with so many amazing people, and you guys. I'm so impressed, especially having been in so many other communities. There's an incredible activist movement and amazing kind of, parents and their voices. And the academics are tireless and they're working around the clock to help support the community. And the government, officials are involved. So
we only introduce her to the nice people.
Yeah, so I see so many ingredients of success here. And I think what I would offer is maybe 2 or 3 tips. One is the need to stay persistent. This is a long game, and there's ups and downs in this movement, and you need to stay persistent. And to that end, you need your people. You need a village to do this, because if you are to stay persistent, it is exhausting, and you will burn out, and it is hard. You need to take care of yourselves. You need a village to lift you up when you are down, and you need to be there to lift them up. This is, once again, a long slog, so you do not do this alone. There's a lot of folks out there that care about the same thing that you care about. Do it together. I think the greatest lesson I learned in Flint were the unexpected allies that I made. As a pediatrician, I used to think we have a monopoly on caring for kids. There's nobody that cares about kids more than we care about kids. And I was proven wrong time and time again. Because so do engineers. Who knew? And so do social workers, and so do pastors, and so do teachers, and so do so many other people. Make friends, make your team big, make your tent large. Find all these unexpected allies that care about the same thing that you care about, and it will be so much easier. So stay persistent, find your people. And then I think that the last kind of bit that I mentioned earlier is make friends with the journalists. Talk to the journalists, share those heartfelt stories. I think something that I've learned as a communicator, especially after kind of writing a book that anybody could pick up and read. I didn't want to write a science academic book. I wanted a book that anybody could read, and I'm going to read you my favorite quote on here. Oprah said it had the gripping intrigue of a Grisham thriller. So, but as I've tried to become a better communicator, I have learned about the power of storytelling, okay? So I used to go and talk to policymakers, and I would talk science and facts and the pathophysiology of lead and what needs to happen, and they literally would fall asleep as I'm talking to them.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. So now every congressional testimony, every conversation I have with anybody who has any purse strings, who has any power, I start with a story. I start with a story. So the last time I testified before Congress, I had my written statement, which was science and facts. It was virtual, which was good and bad. But one good thing about it being virtual, I held up a lead pipe. You can't bring a lead pipe into Congress because it could be a murder weapon. Anyways, so I held up a lead pipe and I held it up to my camera screen. And I shared the story of the lead pipe. I knew the kid that drank from this lead pipe. And I knew his family. His family moved up from Alabama in the 1950s as part of the Great Migration North. They were an auto family. Generations lived in this house that had this lead pipe. Their great-grandson drank water from this pipe, subsequently developed seizures and had a learning disability. So I held up this pipe and I showed our policymakers in my little tiny virtual camera. I showed them that this pipe was like a straw, right? And that millions of kids throughout this country were drinking through straws that were a poison. And then I shared that the pipe was in my hand. Like, OMG, the pipe's in my hand. It's not in the ground anymore. And it's an impossible story that we can do hard things, that we can fix infrastructure, that we can make sure that kids all over, like the kid who drank from the pipe, actually do have safe water. So then I went on and talked about science and facts, but I don't care what they heard after that. I hope that all they remembered was that pipe and the story of that kid and how we can do hard, impossible things for people. So storytelling. So be good storytellers, share your story. I've talked to so many folks already who have these amazing stories about what you've been going through. Lead with those stories, tug at the heartstrings.
Thank you.
Thank you.